Well, I'm really excited to be joined by Carmen today to talk about, I guess, an ironic topic if we're talking about Mel and I'm Mel. For those of you that don't know, we're going to dive into what this means. But to get us started, Carmen, would you mind introducing yourself?
I would love to, and thanks so much for having me, Mel. I noticed the same thing of the acronym overlap with your name, so that should be like a fun sidebar for this conversation. But my name is Carmen Perez. I have became my own boss in 2021 with my company called Better Next. So I work with large corporations on their impact strategy, and it's all backed up by exceptional measurement. So that is my area of work, and I've been in the impact sector for over 20 years, city government, nonprofit, and spent the most of my time in corporate responsibility.
Amazing. Well, you're definitely the perfect person to talk to us about Mel. And for those that aren't familiar, when we say that, we're talking about monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And when we are saying that, what does that actually mean? Could you break it down for us?
Most definitely. So for me, they are distinct. I think of it often like a little bit of like a Venn diagram with the first two parts of it. So I actually use measurement most often, and those are dashboards, scorecards, spreadsheets, all the numbers. It's the ongoing stuff all throughout the year that is data backed. And then evaluation is differentiated because it's more about like conducting a study. There's some kind of unanswered question. There's a beginning and an end to an evaluation, whereas measurement is usually a little bit more ongoing. But what they have in common is that we're talking about numbers, we're talking about surveys, we're talking about all the data-driven things that impact professionals are using. And what they also have in common is learning, the last letter of that acronym. So to me, like learning being added into M&E is something that it probably happened in like the last five-ish years. And I think it was sort of calling out the fact that it should always be for a purpose. So we're using numbers in order to learn, get closer to the issue that we're looking at or the goal that we have. And so it's kind of a uniting purpose for the M&E.
Okay, just maybe a follow-up question. When we talk about like a KPI, where do you think it falls into these three buckets, or is it all of them?
For me, a KPI would definitely be squarely in the M.
Okay.
So if there's uses for M&E, it's like management, communication, improvements. So KPIs are very much part of most corporate people's lives, and that's leaning towards management, and you need them sort of on an ongoing basis. So I'd put that in the measurement bucket.
Makes total sense. And when we understand what we're working on or the impact that we're trying to drive, for you, how does that help us shift from more of a reactive impact approach to a proactive impact approach?
So this is something I'm really passionate about at this moment in time is that impact professionals have all kinds of responsibilities. They're doing this big balancing act, like trying to deliver for the company, and then also sort of are aware of environmental challenges, societal challenges, so delivering across the board. And data has, it's like a tool, it's a job, it's got a job to do for all of us. And we can become more proactive towards those societal environmental issues, like using numbers to back us up. So one thing about being proactive is always making sure your data is in a state of continuous improvement, where we don't just stick with the status quo. You know, there's some numbers that you're going to need every year, but we want to always be in the mentality of like, okay, now that we've learned, is there something that we want to evolve with one or two of the metrics that are on our typical list? The other one is that a lot of times impact professionals can use numbers, monitoring, and evaluation to um, get more specific about the impact back to the business. So it's not just generalized, you know, we're helping meet corporate goals, but get really specific about retention or get really specific about contributions to reputation. And that is going to amplify what you can do to become more proactive. So those are a couple things that I think people should keep in mind when they're putting together their measurement practice to make sure that they're using it almost like a lever point for the future that they want to see for their programs.
Yeah, that really makes me think about something that I use in my own work in oftentimes with the work that I do in supply chains, we look a lot at outputs or like what are the things that are going to come out of the things we put into our supply chain investments and impact, but thinking more about the outcomes. And so, how do we proactively work towards those outcomes rather than just like, oh, yes, more children have attended school or more yields have occurred from the things that we're doing. So, that makes total sense.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice point because what you're talking about is like, how is the data fulfilling your purpose, you know? So like, is the data actually serving where you want to see those supply chain changes happen, you know? Like you need the number to back you up.
I love that. Help use the data to help make the business case or to really like underscore where you're trying to go. And
Hmm.
we've already talked about a Venn diagram, but this feels like maybe another Venn diagram. So also in my work, and I'm sure for many other people, environmental and social work tend to be in separate silos or islands. But when we look at the data at the end of the day, they're pretty similar, have a lot of in common. What do you see there?
I do think that it's one thing where like when we think about the commonalities, it's almost like uh, making like a coalition inside the company because as we know, there's so much more audit, there's so much more assurance being done on this like non-financial information. And so we are allies in the fact that we want this data to still be rigorous, to still meet all of like the expectations of internal audit, but that it's different than financial reporting. So how do we set the standards? How do we write the basis of reporting across all of the targets for everything under the ESG umbrella in a way that um, meets the standards of rigor and also reflects what we know to be true about the fields of environmental sustainability or community impact. So it's not about being more like flexible necessarily, but it is about having like a deeper understanding about the data sources, what is excellence in data. So those things to me feel like there's a lot of commonalities there. Um, Social is probably behind in the regulatory front. Like we know the regulation is happening much more strongly for environment, but we can definitely learn from that process as we know that it's going to change. The S and ESG is also going to sort of be swooped into that regulatory movement. The other thing that comes to mind for me, and I don't know if you experience this in your work, but there is such a flood of software. It's a really crowded market and it's really tough, either from the environmental, social, or the ones that are trying to like group everything together to make sure that what you're purchasing is actually going to fulfill, it's actually going to create the efficiencies you want it to, help the team, and as you said, achieve all the compliance requirements that you might have, but also be in service of those bigger goals. So a flooded software market, I think, is something that we definitely have in common. The last one is a little more inspiring, and it's about employee activation. So to me, the history of like trying to get employees involved in community impact programs goes back so long for people in social impact, volunteering and matching gifts. What's rising, I would observe, and you tell me if you think this is true, is that like, we want more people inside the company to think about their job through a sustainability lens or environmental lens. So this idea of like activating employees to like take a higher purpose to the day-to-day decisions that they're making is something where, sustainability professionals, I think, can collaborate with the people in the social silo, as it were, to see like different functions inside the company sort of stepping up on things which may not be in their job description, but they can do them in a different way um, for the greater goals that the company might have or that they can just see is like better for the world.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I often say that enabling and empowering employees is like the biggest army of individuals that you can have behind your cause. And to me, if you're able to have everybody have a seat at the table, or at least an understanding or a passion, a minor passion maybe, for sustainability or social impact work, it means that whatever the hallway conversation is or whatever the interaction is, people are grounded in what your bigger goals are. And there's more people that are willing to give up time or to find a way that in their day-to-day jobs they're contributing. And I couldn't agree more. I think it's really important and something that a lot of companies aren't doing.
Hmm.
Um,
They take pride in their work.
Exactly. It creates a shared responsibility and a sense of community, which I think is really valuable. When we think about that flood of service providers and all of the different softwares that are available, popping up, expanding, it's so interesting to me as a user, and I'm sure the same for you, because bad data in, bad data out. You could have the fanciest system in the world. If your data quality is not good, even if you're uploading it into a super fun user interface, it's not going to get you what you need. And I think that there's an unfortunate, what I've at least seen in scoping or talking to some of these service providers is that there isn't a very large like data cleanup element to a lot of the
Mm.
using. And I think that to me, that's a missing element because if I'm gonna get a cool dashboard, that's awesome. But if what it's showing me isn't right or like in the direction I'm going, it's not the most useful. And
That's so true. I often joke that measurement is boring. Like, you have to be willing to like get into the spreadsheet and be like, okay, like, is this telling me like I gotta look myself, not the auditor, and say like, are these lines all matching up? Is this what I expect? Spot
exactly.
checks, cleaning up. And I know that there's so many people in massive, 100,000 employees, billions in revenue, and they're doing work in Excel. And they're starting to think like, should I not be doing work in Excel? And I would say, yes, you definitely should. Like it's not going to be able to do like what softwares can do in other scenarios, like let's say like data collected on the back end of a website. You have a ton of data and you need big models and software to help you figure that out. If you're still doing work in Excel and it feels sort of manual, that might be the right choice. Because we're focused on our purpose. This is supposed to be
Yeah.
helping us figure out, are we achieving our goals? So don't be shy to use Excel if that's what's going to tell you what you need to know.
I totally agree. It's not a majority opinion, but I do think if that's the use that's going to get you to where you want to go, it's the most important element.
Or Google Spreadsheets, whatever.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. This is just a simple spreadsheet for sure. So when we're thinking about all of you mentioned a bunch of regulation and kind of reporting or quantitative reporting, what are we seeing change as there's a rise in assurance and audit and verification?
Well, this is something that I think is like maybe an unintended consequence of the rise of like audit insurance regulation. I think the sustainability and responsibility reports are actually going to maybe shrink in length, because we're going to look at that more like a public filing, which is a good thing. It's sort of like we always hoped it would become deeply integrated and sort of part of the company. So it is because of decades of work by sustainability and impact professionals to get it to that level. But then, because what we said about the different types of data and information that rise up in impact work, we need new outlets for
Yeah.
sharing that information. So what I've observed is now sort of like a dedicated impact page or a dedicated sustainability page, dedicated community page where like stories can be shared. They're still accurate, they're still credible, but they might not have gone through internal audit outside assurance. And so new communications channels, as outlets for the data-driven stories that teams are producing, I think are actually pretty exciting. They happen more often, you can
Yeah.
control the volume, you can think about the timing. And I think that's important more from like an engagement and an activation point of view because you're able to share bytes of information more frequently, even externally. Like that often happens like on the internet or through whatever
Yeah.
um, internal communication channels people already have, but that's sort of exciting. So it might be a little bit of like a rocky, like that always used to be in the sustainability report, and now we're trying to move it and what's happening. And like people might feel like they're losing real estate, but I think thinking about what lives in the report versus what lives in other places is like an exciting thing for the field to consider now.
It is exciting. And it's also like maybe more minor touch points are more impactful than one major milestone. Now, we've covered a lot of ground, and I'm curious what you think, whether it's somebody who's brand new to Mel or who's well established but trying to kind of refine their practice. What are your biggest advice for those individuals?
I would go back to that continuous improvement point because when I think about this question, just sitting down and having a reflective moment with let's call it like your vital few metrics. This is what we do every year. It goes in the final year in review slide deck and just pressure test them in your mind. Are we balanced? Are we reflecting our strategy? What's missing? Like there's a huge part of our work that's not showing up here. And just pressure test in a way with that mind towards improvement and like the bigger impact that you want to have. And then pick a couple. Like, okay, we're just gonna now, this is the one that's the most problematic. We're gonna try to move that off of the list. This is what's not here. And I really have to figure out what is something that I could add to that vital few list and it will stand the test of time. So I feel like having that reflective moment, because as we said, data and measurement can become very operational. You're working through a lot, you want to make sure everything's accurate, and so it becomes technical. And sort of like stepping back and pressure test from a strategy point of view, I think is something that would benefit everybody.
Absolutely. Well, that is a great place to go forth and prosper for those of us that are looking to dig deeper on monitoring, evaluation, and learning. I really thank you for helping to break it down to the basic, and I feel empowered to go do my own work in this space.
Awesome. And thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation.